All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. The date where I'm at right now is August 18th, 2025, and it's about 7:48 p.m. where I'm at. And we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 23 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Harry Haywood Hall. For this episode, we will be completing all of chapter 20. It's a very long chapter. It's one of the longest chapters in the book. We started reading it earlier today, but I called it off early because I was just getting extremely tired. I work extremely, hard outside of my YouTube stuff, and I just have not been getting enough sleep. So I took a quick little power nap, and now we're back on live to finish this chapter. Now we're going to be starting here on the Fight for Our Revolutionary Line, which is the last section of chapter 20. And in this section, Harry Haywood is fighting back against the reactionary forces within the Communist Party that want to take the party to the center, if not the right. We were reading earlier about Browderism, the idea that the Communist Party is going to give up the struggle against the capitalist class and take on some bourgeois elements after World War II. So let's continue here. I will be reading any comments in the chat. Thank you to everybody who's been supporting, and let's begin. The Fight for Our Revolutionary Line. On my return, I began hearing more and more about the attack on the left and rumors about old friends of mine who were under attack. From what I could see, all was not well with the party, nor was the rank and file satisfied with the course of the struggle against Browderism. To me, the one bright spot in all this was the struggle to reaffirm our revolutionary position on the black national question, for the party to once again take up the fight for the right of self-determination in the Black Belt. I followed this whole question very closely, and it was clear to me that the impetus came mainly from the black cadres and particularly from the new blood that had come into the party in the last decade. At that time, blacks made up 15% of party membership. Despite Browder's liquidationist policies, the party still maintained its reputation as a leader in the struggle for Negro rights. I felt that this was largely due to the outstanding reputation the party had built for itself during the campaigns of the 30s, Scottsboro, the ILD, the Unemployed Councils, and its yeoman work in building the CIO and organizing the unorganized. The party maintained its fighting reputation through much of the war, despite the opportunist errors that were made. During the 30s and 40s, this was the basis for the recruitment of large numbers of outstanding young blacks who quickly matured as leaders at every level of the party and the mass movements. This core of black cadres was further strengthened by the return of black veterans who were acutely aware of the gains made during the course of the war and how these gains were now being threatened. These cadres played a leading role in the working class struggle, and their role in the party's strong fight for seniority rights after the war was particularly important. The layoffs of the late 40s had a harsh effect on black workers, many of whom first entered industry during the war and were often the lowest in seniority. A spontaneous Black Caucus movement arose in these years as the top leadership of both the AFL and the CIO steadfastly refused to take up the special demands of black workers. In 1951, these caucuses united into a national organization, the National Negro Labor Councils. Such struggles deeply affected the cadres and reflected the rising sense of struggle and militancy of black people in general. I myself was very much aware of this spirit. When my first ship docked, I spent a lot of time walking the streets of Harlem. I was struck with the visible optimism on the faces of the people passing me in the street. Black people would no longer be cowed and bullied by Jim Crow. They had experienced a mass political awakening as a result of their wartime experiences, and this was reflected in their manner. This contrasts sharply with how Harry described traveling in Harlem, I believe a few decades earlier, after he left the army at the end of World War I, and when he was walking around the black section of New York, which Harlem historically has been. He saw the desperation on people's faces. Many people were just, beaten down, and I believe also there was an economic downturn at the time, so he saw a lot of poverty and just, felt the despair in the air. But now he's walking around Harlem and after World War II and seeing that many black people are, optimistic about the future because of the economic gains they had made. So the war served to break the historic isolation of the Afro-American people from the struggles of the peoples of the world. Black men and women served over 1 million strong in the armed forces, and the wartime expansion of industry saw an unprecedented number of blacks, close to 1 million workers, come into the U.S. labor force. Through such involvement, black people were able to see more than ever that they had allies in the colonially oppressed people abroad and in the U.S. working class at home in their struggle against Jim Crow and monopoly capitalism. Black people were deeply influenced by the colonial and semi-colonial upsurge of World War II as people in India, China, Indonesia, Africa, Latin America, and the liberated countries of Eastern Europe rose up to oppose fascist and imperialist domination. National minorities within the boundaries of the Soviet Union had been liberated by the Socialist Revolution and were now exercising one form or another of self-government. More than ever, Afro-Americans were determined to fight for equality and full democratic rights at home. There could be no turning back, no return to the past. During the course of the war, momentum had been building toward an upsurge in the Black liberation movement, and it burst into full bloom once the war ended. There was a firm commitment by blacks to carry on the fight against Hitler at home. The post-war period saw the largest strike wave in history, and black workers played a leading role in it. In militant strikes and actions led by the Negro labor councils, black workers demanded jobs, upgrading and training into skilled jobs, along with greater representation in unions and in the leadership thereof. At the same time, they played a very important role in the liberation movement as renewed struggle developed against lynchings, frame-ups, police brutality, and the general denial of equality and democratic rights. As early as 1946, the Civil Rights Congress, or CRC, was formed to replace the ILD, which had largely been liquidated under Browder. The CRC was headed by my old friend William Patterson, and in 1951, it submitted We Charge Genocide, a petition to the United States, for relief from the crime of the United States government against the Negro people. This formidable document, inspired by Patterson, recounts much of the terrorism of this period, when lynchings and Klan activity were on the rise throughout the country, and especially in the South. The frame-up in the case of a self-defense slaying and subsequent life sentence of Mrs. Rosalie Ingram and her sons in Georgia, the burning and destruction of the entire black community of Columbia, Tennessee, and the frame-up on rape charges and execution of the Martinsville Seven are but a few examples. This spontaneous upsurge made it all the more pressing. The party once again take up the fight for the right of self-determination. Without such a revolutionary program, the party would never be able to play a leading role in the struggle or to unite black and white workers. I never heard that there was like a Black Wall Street type event in Tennessee, though I'm not surprised. Many veteran black cadres played an important role at this time, but I especially remember the young people. For instance, as I have already mentioned, Claudia Jones's discussion article that kicked off a huge debate in the summer of 1945, attacking Browder's ideological and political stand on the black national question. Jones contended that Browder's line on self-determination was based on a pious hope that the struggle for full economic, social, and political equality for the Negro people would be legislated and somehow brought into being through reforms from on top. Jones upheld the revolutionary position as a scientific principle that derives from an objective condition and upon the basis expresses the fundamental demands, land, equality, and freedom of the oppressed Negro people. We got to read some Claudia Jones. She sounds dope. The debate began as an important phase of the struggle against Browder. It continued in the clubs, the sections, and the districts for over a year. Almost every issue of the PA from the middle of 1945 through December 1946 carried an article relating to some aspect of the struggle. Under the cover of a ringing denunciation of Browderism, the right came forward to continue his liquidationist line on the black national question and to oppose the right of self-determination. This time, the banners were carried by two college professors, Doxey Wilkerson, a black man and formerly a professor at Howard University, and Francis Franklin, a white professor from the University of Virginia. While couched in sociological and theoretical jargon and with constant allusions to new developments in the Black Belt, their arguments were just another rehash of the assimilationist deviation on the question. While opposing the right of self-determination, both Franklin and Wilkerson discussed the growing trend toward integration and disintegration of the black majority in the Black Belt, the breakup of the sharecropping system, and semi-feudal relations of agriculture to support their arguments. So basically, like, these academics came up and they started saying, well, things have changed in the South. Most black people don't work in agriculture anymore. Black people are slowly integrating into society. There's going to be no more reason to advocate for black self-determination. And, Harry, as somebody who's been involved with the fight and also in touch with his people the entire time, knows that this is just BS. Both tended to downplay the role of the national aspirations of black people and to portray the direct integrationist trend as the only significant aspect of the movement. They totally negated the possibility of a national revolutionary upsurge, that the black liberation struggle would ultimately take an autonomous direction towards political power as a guarantee for equality. Wilkerson and Franklin failed to understand that in the Black Belt, this could mean nothing less than the right of self-determination, that is, the option of autonomy, federation, or secession. Franklin's analysis was different from earlier liquidators only in that he discovered a new dimension to the right of self-determination, the right of amalgamation with the dominant nation. While the struggle for unity has always been implicit in the right of self-determination, Franklin had something else in mind. By calling for the right to amalgamate, he was actually advocating the right to disperse, to disintegrate, and blend into the rest of the country. Max Weiss, a member of the National Committee and formerly a leader of the YCL, wrote a substantial article refuting Franklin's line. In it, he stated what he perceives as Franklin's meaning. The right of self-determination means the right to be a nation, the right to put an end to its existence as a nation. Rather than seeing it as a question of the masses of black people fighting for the right to control their destinies, Franklin saw it as a struggle for the national bourgeoisie to control its own markets. In a sort of inverted Jim Crowism, Franklin argues that a black nation can only develop under Jim Crow because that brings about the development of a separate black capitalist class. It is this separate Negro capitalism which has formed the economic base of the emergence among the Negro people of the Black Belt of separate national characteristics of their own. Clearly, in Franklin's estimation, the system of Jim Crow was breaking down, and this was bringing about the elimination of the national bourgeoisie, and with it, the possibility of the development of a black nation. So basically, what they're trying to say is that, to form a nation, nations mostly are, bourgeois states. Nations are created by the capitalist class who are able to galvanize people to the idea of, let's create a separate nation of our own based on our identity, whatever that may be. And the professor, the black professor, I believe, Franklin, is saying, listen, Jim Crow is breaking down. There's, in a few more years or a generation or so, we won't have white or black anything separate. And so how can there be a black nation if there is no more black bourgeoisie? And so, that's an interesting argument. I'm not buying it. Once again, I'm not bought into the idea of black nationalism as Harry Haywood describes it. I still don't even see, because a nation can be bound on something else, right? I mean, they're literal communists you're talking to. So they might say that the nation doesn't have to be based on the bourgeoisie capitalist creation or idea of the nation. But continuing here. Wilkerson's line was slick, but even more bankrupt as, based on a few token gains, he painted a blissful picture of the uninterrupted progress of black people under imperialism. Wilkerson's perspective on the question is that the nation is new and embryonic, and it is therefore possible for it to develop in any number of directions. In the case of the black nation, it is going more and more in the direction of full integration with black people becoming a national minority. Thus, he states, the perspective for the Negro people in the United States is neither toward disintegration as a people nor toward statehood as a nation. It is probably toward further development as a national minority, as a distinct and increasingly self-conscious community of Negro Americans. Wilkerson went so far as to state that the black nation is too embryonic even to be conscious of its own nationhood. The implication from this being that if black people don't demand self-government, why should communists do it for them? In fact, there has been strong waves of nationalism in the black liberation struggle. The Garvey movement, the 49th Staters, and the Sufis were but a few examples. Wilkerson would have been astounded to hear of the number of subject nations that had even less developed national characteristics, but nevertheless were still afforded the right of self-determination by communists. In the 20s, a Yugoslavian communist, Semic, had raised similar arguments concerning the Croats and Slovenes in his own country. Stalin spoke to Semic's argument in a speech entitled Concerning the National Question in Yugoslavia. In 1912, when we Russian Marxists were outlining the first draft of the national program, no serious movement for independence yet existed in any of the border regions of the Russian Empire. Nevertheless, we deemed it necessary to include in our program the point on the right of nations to self-determination. That is, the right of every nationality to secede and exist as an independent state. Why? Because we based ourselves not only on what existed then, but also on what was developing and impending in the general system of international relations. That is, we took into account not only the present, but also the future. Wilkerson's theories were refuted in two well-documented and well-formulated articles by James Allen. To Wilkerson's claim that more and more blacks were leaving to the Black Belt, Allen countered that this has been an historic trend since the end of the Civil War. Nevertheless, the Black Belt was still an area of black majority and still maintained the remnants of slavery in the sharecropping system. While Wilkerson contended that the right of self-determination can only mean secession, Allen correctly pointed out that federation and various forms of autonomy were also encompassed within the right of self-determination. Very interesting that Stalin, spoke about the Yugoslav question because as somebody who's been to the Balkans, the lines are very defined when it comes to national identity, even though they all speak the same language, from Slovenia to Serbia and somewhat Northern Macedonia as well. They generally all speak the same language, and it's just the religion divides people. The Croats are Catholic, Serbians are Orthodox, Bosnians are Muslim, etc., etc. But yet and still, there is clear identity. And when Stalin was talking about the Yugoslav question, many people didn't even have the idea of a Croatian nation, a Bosnian nation, etc., etc. So I think what he's pointing out here is that, black people, while we might not have the idea of black nationhood, it might not be something that we readily, rally around, or the concept itself, that it still ended up happening for them. If you went back 200 years and told some guy in Croatia, hey, the Croats will have their own nation, they might have looked at you crazy. Maybe we'll be saying the same thing 200 years from now when black Americans have their own state or something like that. Anyway, continuing here. Linking the working class struggle with the black liberation movement, Allen stated, history has taught us, and our present political experiences teach us, that every forward step of the progressive movement, every advance toward the unity of white and Negro workers, and every democratic gain makes self-determination of the Negro people more realizable. I had been doing a lot of study and writing at this time and saw that the party needed to have a basic program for agrarian reform in the Black Belt, the kind of program that had been liquidated with the dissolution of the Sharecroppers Union, toward a program of agrarian reforms for the Black Belt. A 2-article series was my contribution to developing such a program. Later, much expanded and deepened in Negro liberation, these articles re-examined the agrarian system in the South based on current data. The essential thesis of the articles was that lying at the roots of the oppression of blacks is the unsolved agrarian question in the South. The Southern plantation system, with its deeply rooted semi-feudal characteristics, is being forcibly maintained by the imperialist ruling class in alliance with the Southern oligarchy through the system of Jim Crow laws and lynch terror. It is, in fact, continually reproducing black inequality in all walks of life, condemning blacks to Jim Crow in the South and throughout the country. With a long-range program of self-government for the Black Belt, the articles also included such immediate demands as reduction of land rentals, written contracts between landlord and tenant, and abolition of all laws and practices supporting peonage. The culmination of this intensive period of debate and struggle was the restoration of the revolutionary position on the Afro-American question. At a National Committee plenum in December 1946, the party adopted a resolution which reaffirmed its support for self-determination for the Black Belt. This victory, in great measure, must be attributed to the militancy and determination of the younger comrades who played such an important role. The party's rededication to this revolutionary fight had particularly important consequences for work in the South, which had been most seriously affected by dropping the position. In 1947, 2 years after the party was reconstituted in the South, membership was up to 2,000, higher than it had ever been. Cadres began playing a leading role in building the fight for equal rights and in the anti-lynching campaigns, in the trade unions, and organizing the unorganized. Communists led 2 important strikes in North Carolina, which saw some 17,000 tobacco workers come under union contract for the first time. Miranda Smith, a young black woman and a member of the Southern Negro Youth Conference, was an outstanding and militant leader in the strike. Unfortunately, she died soon thereafter. A part of the brief upsurge of party work in the South was the 1948 Progressive Party campaign, in which communists were very active. Paul Robeson and Wallace made an unprecedented joint tour of seven southern states, loudly refusing to obey the Jim Crow laws governing meeting, eating, and sleeping places, and attacking white supremacy head-on. The Wallace campaign in the South was in many ways a mass protest movement against segregation. Party members also helped build the New Orleans Youth Conference, an organization of over 500 black and white youth. It picketed New Orleans stores in protest of discrimination against blacks and integrated buses and streetcars in defiance of local laws. Eventually, the NOYC merged with the Southern Negro Youth Conference. In the spring and summer of 1948, I participated in 2 important meetings on the agrarian question. These meetings were valuable because they were part of the struggle to reconstitute the party in the South. I was very enthusiastic about the first of these, which was held in Atlanta, which I hadn't been in the South since the 30s. There was still harsh Jim Crow, but there was something else afoot. Though I was only there a short time, I could see it on the streets, a part of the general post-war upsurge of black people, but with its own special Southern character. Buses were still segregated, but black people no longer waited until all the whites were on board before they themselves got on. This was a small step, but I knew it wouldn't stop there. Could you imagine Jim Crow in Atlanta? I could not imagine. I know it's crazy. Of course, there was Jim Crow in Atlanta, but in Atlanta, could you imagine trying to tell them YNs, yo, we bringing Jim Crow back to Atlanta? Could you imagine a YN being transported back to the 1950s during Jim Crow in Atlanta? That's crazy. I couldn't imagine. They wouldn't take it. They wouldn't take it. Anyway, the meeting, which was attended mainly by Southern cadres, was to summarize some of the past mistakes and begin to draw up a program. It was at this meeting that I first learned in some detail of what had happened when the SCU had been liquidated. Following this, there was another meeting in New York to discuss the agrarian question. At this meeting, I found the rightist tendency to lump the special oppression of black sharecroppers and tenants in the South into the more general farm question was still prevalent. I remember that we held a very long discussion on this point, and after considerable struggle, we were able to win the majority to the correct line. Out of these meetings came general agreement with the need for a revolutionary program of agrarian reform in the South, based on the right of self-determination for the black nation. As a result of these discussions, the Agrarian Commission developed such a program, and it was published in Political Affairs in March of 1949. Unfortunately, this program was never put into practice, nor did it ever take on any organizational form. In general, this victory in the field of Afro-American work was to be only short-lived, as the right opportunist trend hovered forebodingly in the wings. The main political thrust of the leadership at the time was to build a coalition with the forces arrayed around the Truman administration. This was merely a continuation of the rightist United Front policies of the Browder period and had important implications for the party's work. Faced with such a strong movement among the rank and file, however, the party leadership was forced to accept reaffirmation of the revolutionary line. I strongly suspect that their intentions from the beginning were to subvert that line. This is evident in Dennis's remarks at the December 1946 plenum of the National Committee. I think we would make a serious and harmful mistake if we were to associate the realization of the right of self-determination solely with the realization of socialism in the United States, he stated. And further, if the American people, the labor movement in alliance with the great Negro people, and all progressive and democratic forces can check and defeat the onslaughts of pro-fascist monopoly reaction and to bring into power as an important phase of that struggle, a progressive presidential ticket in Congress in 1948. With all that this would entail, many things would be possible, including at least tremendous strides toward the full realization of equal rights of the Negro people in the Black Belt. This statement clearly cuts away at the revolutionary heart of the right of self-determination and puts it in the context of a program of electoral reform. It was a crude attempt to make the slogan acceptable to the liberal and reformist leaders the party saw as its allies. It is an utter denigration of the slogan, reducing it to a reformist character and fostering the illusion that such profound changes in the lives of the black masses can occur without mass revolutionary struggle against monopoly capitalism. Dennis's position has sounded a little off to me from the start. I felt all along that he had never agreed with the slogan, and certainly I had never heard him before defend it. In the same speech, he seemed to be hedging on the question. It appears to me now, in looking back, that it was some form of apology for the period of backsliding and vacillation under Browder. In a manner that could easily be used by the right to justify dropping the principle of self-determination, Dennis referred to past sectarianism in application of the slogan, as though this had been widespread. It's true that there had been some sectarianism when the position first adopted in 1928, and then again in the early 30s when we had little practical experience. There were those who tried to decide in advance what the final solution would be for black people. For instance, Pepper's demand for a Negro Soviet Republic. But these left sectarian errors had never been the main deviations in our work. It seemed to me that Dennis was again trying to raise a straw man on the left to avoid dealing with the main danger of right opportunism. The party leadership had already undertaken the liquidation of the left-led centers in the mass movement, and soon after the plenum, the once influential National Negro Congress was dissolved. Why does the CPUSA continue to dissolve these cool-sounding, very radical black groups in the party? These are not good. That's not good. That's not good business. The National Negro Congress dissolved, gone. Sharecroppers Union, gone. All these cool-ass organizations with cool-ass names. The NNC, the SCU. Come on now. Anyway, the leadership contended that black comrades should move into the mainstream of Negro life. As best represented by the NAACP, and not become isolated in so-called sectarian organizations like the NNC. Going now to the comments, Arthur Sage says, I heard a YN say what would be the difference because where he is from in the South and Midwest, they never stopped. Mostly blacks in the same area, homeless and renting. That's a good point, Arthur Sage. I'm just thinking about these YNs that be wearing the ski masks that pull out with the sticks, like a long ass stick in his skinny jeans, you know what I mean? I couldn't imagine a dreadhead YN weighing less than like 100 pounds being told to get in the back of the bus. Now I know that's like BS because, you know, there were some wild radical black folks back then, you know what I mean? And yeah, they took that Jim Crow on the chin. They had to go to the back of the bus. They would yes sir and no ma'am and all that sort of stuff. So I get what you're saying, Arthur Sage. Like most likely those YNs would have got put in their place. But still, can a man dream? Can I have can I at least have fun with the idea in my mind of a YN in skinny jeans hopping out with a stick, spraying up the white only cafe back in Jim Crow? Can I imagine? Can I just Can I just... But I hear you, Arthur Sage. For real, for real. A lot of segregation. I grew up in a segregated town. I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana. And the black folks stay across the tracks, east side and south side. Anyway, continuing here. So, that this was not the view of the majority of cadres was dramatically illustrated to me a couple of years later at an enlarged meeting of the National Negro Commission in New York. This meeting was attended by 30 or 40 of the party's top cadres, mostly black, in the field of Afro-American work. I remember that I made a speech questioning the liquidation of the NNC and calling for the formation of a left-led United Front organization to take its place. Paul Robeson, a great human being and an ardent fighter for black liberation, had just returned from Europe and was at the height of his popularity. I reasoned that we might take advantage of Robeson's acclaim by asking him to head such an organization and to build a broad, mass-based movement. Betty Gannett and Pettis Perry, representing the leadership at the meeting, spoke vigorously against this proposal, saying that it was sectarian and that there was no need for another organization among black people. I had expected such a response from them, but I was surprised by the overwhelming support my proposal received from the cadres, especially the young blacks. They spoke so forcefully in support of my proposals that Gannett and Perry had to retreat, saying that they certainly would bring the matter before the National Committee. I don't know whether or not they did, but that was the last time I ever heard anything about it. Despite the important gains made in the field, the rightist tendency remained very persistent. It expressed itself mainly in the form of the coalition concept and affected not only the work among blacks but all areas of mass work, the trade unions in particular. This policy was actually an extension of Browder's liquidationist line, which was never thoroughly rejected by the new leadership and left the party tailing the liberal and reformist leaders. The political basis for such a concept could not be found in the harsh realities of the Cold War and the attack on communism worldwide, but only in the minds and hearts, and the most wishful thinking of those who propounded it. The 1945 Reconstitution Resolution states, "The Truman administration, like the Roosevelt government, from which it is developing, continues to receive the support of the Roosevelt Labor Democratic Coalition and responds to various class procedures." Not only does this reflect the party's classic overestimation of the Roosevelt forces in particular, but also a failure to understand the role of such forces as representatives of the imperialist class as a whole. Underlying this outlook was the failure to recognize the realignment of class forces, especially the sharp swing to the right of the party, especially the sharp swing to the right on the part of the top leadership of the CIO and labor generally, as well as the old-line reformist leadership of the NAACP. While the party remained spellbound by this line, seemingly oblivious to the world around it, anti-communist resolutions were passed in the trade unions. So-called progressive center labor leaders like Walter Reuther and Philip Murray bolted with lightning speed to the side of the imperialists. The NAACP leaders involved themselves in a vicious red-baiting campaign as the government began gearing up the machinery for full enforcement of the Smith Act. I'm not familiar with the Smith Act is, but if that's banning communists from government office, then that would make sense in the context of the sentence. If you know what the Smith Act is, put it in the chat. If there's any smart researchers out there or somebody that can do a quick chat GPT or Google search, let me know what the Smith Act was. Anyway, all such measures were fully backed by the courts, the police, federal agents, and all levels of government. Very interesting. So basically, Browder led the party to, the jaws of defeat because they were trying to warm up to the NAACP and these, mainstream labor organizations like the AFL and the CIO. Meanwhile, these organizations were like, we don't want any communists with us. You get what I'm saying? No communists, like kicking people out, you know what I mean? Making sure that they can't get on ballots and be unemployed, all sorts of stuff. Anyway, continuing here. Class struggle in the NMU. I could see the obvious effects of this policy in the National Maritime Union. If you don't remember, in the previous chapter, Harry joined the National Maritime Union. He was a merchant marine and he traveled on ships all across the world. Basically help maintain the ship and help maintain the crew. So The Cold War realignment of forces was bringing on a crisis of the left in the trade union movement, a clear employer-government drive against communists, a drive to break up the left-center coalition. While this shift had already begun before the war ended, it was clear that they really meant business at the 1946 CIO convention in Atlantic City, when the CIO Declaration of Policy on Communism was passed. The statement held that the convention delegates resent and reject efforts of the Communist Party or other political parties and their adherents to interfere in the affairs of the CIO. Going to the comments, Snake says, but for what she believed. I don't know what you mean, Snake, by that. I don't know what you're saying right there. Something's missing, or I don't get the context. Anyway. This move signaled the first round in the post-war attack on the wages and living standards of the working class and was a clear victory for the monopoly capitalists. In fact, there was no organized opposition to the right-wing bloc, which was led by Social Democrats, Trotskyites, Christian Fronters, and Coughlinites. The CP delegates also voted for the resolution, while the party press took an "it could have been a lot worse" kind of stand. That's crazy. That's insane. Communists were voting for labor unions to say no communists inside the labor unions. That's crazy. And then they went into the press and said, we did all we could, guys. This reminds me of the Democrats in Texas right now who are trying to fight back against redistricting. And they only went to Chicago for 2 weeks. They could have waited for at least a few more months to fight back against the Republicans who were threatening their lives and their careers by saying, if you don't come back, we're going to remove you from office. You'll be arrested as soon as you step a foot in Texas and all that sort of stuff. And the scared Democrats said, oh, okay, we'll return to Texas. We'll return. Oh, sorry, we're so bad. The Democrats basically had a thought holiday in Chicago. This is why most people hate Democrats. This is why I'm sorry I'm ranting about something else, but this weakness from leftists sometimes really pisses me off. It almost makes you want to become a Republican sometimes. Almost makes you want to become a Republican because even though the Republicans are evil, even though the Republicans are literally retarded and believe the stupidest shit, they at least get shit done and they'll stand on business. When George Bush lost the election in 2000, they sent a bunch of white men in suits to rampage in Miami, Florida, casting out thousands of ballots from black people to make sure their guy got in office. And it was only one Supreme Court vote that guaranteed George Bush get in office. Meanwhile, the Democrats spend 2 weeks in Chicago and can't even say, yo, we don't give a fuck if we lose our jobs, lose our law firms, get our licenses revoked, anything like that. I'm sorry for ranting. I went off on a tirade right there. But I can't believe this. That sentence pissed me off. There have been a lot of crazy sentences in here. But the CP delegates, the Communist Party delegates, voted for the resolution that banned communists from working with the main labor unions like the AFL and the CIO. Anyway, this left the masses of delegates a confused and easy prey to the demagoguery of the right wing, thus sacrificing democratic rights for unity and an independent stand for coalition at any price. The party suffered blow after blow at the hands of the Ruthers, Murrays, and Currans. When, in 1948, it had become clear that the trade union bureaucrats were unalterably lined up against the left, the party half-heartedly tried to shift gears, calling for a rank-and-file upsurge in support of the communists. But the move was unsuccessful in that the party refused, even in the face of vicious reaction, to fully break with its policy of tailing the bureaucrats, leaving large sections of the rank and file to become consolidated behind the right-wing leadership of the unions. The party refused to play the bold, independent role that was necessary if we were to exert any kind of leadership in the labor movement. Go in here to the comments. Snake sent $10. I appreciate that, Snake. I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much for that, Snake. I appreciate that. You know, it's not easy doing what I do, reading these books on live in between my busy schedule as an English teacher and as a writer. But much love to you, Snake. I really appreciate that donation. I really appreciate that so much. Power to the people. Anyway, so continuing here. The party refused to play the bold, independent role that was necessary if we were to exert any kind of leadership in the labor movement. The NMU was a crucial arena of this struggle. Built by the Communist Party, it was the most left and democratic of all the unions. Communists were in the majority of the National Board. NMU ships were a school for ideological and political struggle, not only around the day-to-day issues on the ship, but on the broader political questions as well. Communism, Trotskyism, Stalin, and the black national question were regular topics of mass ideological debate. The NMU seamen had served proudly in the Spanish Civil War. The NMU had a reputation as the finest, most progressive, and democratic union in the country. Ships crewed by the unions were the first in the maritime industry to have checkerboard black and white crews. Jesse Gray, a black seaman and friend of mine who began sailing when he was 16 or 17 years old, described the general feeling that blacks had about the union at that time. One thing that was really exciting, you had to have been in the NMU to really feel it. It was like another world. It's like going to China, to the Soviet Union on a trip if you've never been there. If you've always lived in the South in the U.S. where racism was so sharp, and to go to the NMU where blacks and whites were on the ship, they were together, worked together. It was a real big thing. And that was only as a result of the sharp struggles of the more advanced political forces. And to the role of black workers, Jesse said, black workers in particular gave leadership to the NMU and arose then as a tremendous conscious force. Black workers and their allies were the most powerful bloc on the waterfront. One would have thought that we communists were so strong that we could never have been driven out of the Union. We built it, we fought for it, but we reckoned without our host. They had a plan which had been developed over a number of years and which included the use of government training schools to develop cadres of seamen. This was an organized attempt to create a split among members in the Union with payoffs to right-wingers and Union thugs. While the party vacillated and refused to take a stand against such chicanery, the ship owners and the government scored victory after victory, and NMU President Joseph Karan was their man. Very interesting stuff here. Oh man, I often think about like the modern unions now, and they say that some unions are run by the mob. I wonder if the government, the US government, tolerates some unions being ran by basically gangsters, thugs, criminals, because they would rather have criminals and, mafia members run these organizations than real left-wing activists that would use the power of the union to enforce radical change. You get what I'm saying? I wonder if that's ever been, proven or researched. But I'm going to continue here. So Curran had been a leader of the Union since its founding days in 1936 as a militant split-off of the bureaucratic and corrupt Seamen's International Union, or SIU. A rough and tumble sailor whose home ashore had once been Battery Park, Curran had experienced a rapid shift in fortunes since the founding of the Union. He had once been a militant fighter, and before the breakup of the left-center coalition, had been counted among the left in the Union. The party was very slow to understand what was happening and to change its strategy accordingly when Curran began shifting to the right in late 1945 and 46. I noticed this change atmosphere as soon as I got back on the ship in the fall of 1946. We were sailing on the USS Washington. She had been a troop ship during the war and had been reconverted by her owner, United States Lines, to her old status as transatlantic passenger liner. She traveled the New York, Southampton, Le Havre routes, sometimes stopping at Cobb, Ireland, in County Cork. It was a 16 or 17-day voyage, and I stayed with it off and on for a year while I was writing my book. She was a big old ship, damp and drafty, with a crew of about 700. Conditions in general were poor, and seamen were always being injured. Accommodations in the crew's quarters, the glory hole, were unbearable. Calling a place to sleep the glory hole is crazy. A lot of the references to like ships and being a seaman and sailing are hella zesty. These are very zesty. Accommodations in the crew's quarters, the glory hole, were unbearable. Sick, man. Can we change the name, please? If anybody's been on a boat, if anybody's been on a cruise, if anybody's worked on a cruise, which I highly doubt to the 4 people that are watching this right now, do they still call it the glory hole, where people sleep on a ship? if you're working the crew, because that's nasty. That's nasty work. I'm going to continue. Under such conditions, there was quite naturally a good bit of struggle on board. And here is where we clearly saw the new alignment of forces. It was the rank and file against the Curranites all the way. Curran's men would faithfully tail the company's line. At that time, the ship owners had a major campaign to put all their ships under foreign flags in order to enjoy cheap wages and get rid of the Union. This necessitated temporarily shutting down a number of ships which sailed under U.S. flags. When the company would threaten to take the Washington to the ship's graveyard up the Hudson River, the Curran forces would say that we should withdraw all pending grievances or face the loss of 700 jobs. Save jobs at all costs, they said. We, of course, opposed this line. As long as we had jobs, we would fight for our rights. Curran had a willing and ready accomplice in the Trotskyite Socialist Workers' Party. The Washington crew in 1947 represented for the first time a large concentration of Trotskyites, and they were clearly out to get the party. They thought if they could tail behind Curran, even get a few places on the Curran slate, they could help in wiping communists out of the industry and emerge as the sole unchallenged left-wing leadership. The second half of their plan was never to come to fruition, but they certainly served the cause of Curran and the ship owners well. Instead of joining us on the basic issues, they firmly took up the collaborationist policies of the Curranites in opposing strikes and other such actions in order to save jobs. They became Curran's goons. When the Coast Guard screened all the communists out of the industry, the Trots were saved, particularly in payment for their meritorious service to the government, and particularly because they represented no threat to the Curran leadership. But the progressive communist-led left was very strong on that ship. We controlled the steward's department, 400 men, about two-thirds of whom were black and Puerto Rican, and also had strong forces on deck and in the engine room. The right couldn't openly oppose us, so they had to resort to more underhanded tactics. Often they would use guys like Frank Ryan to try and infiltrate our ranks. An able-bodied seaman and a very capable bastard. That's a hilarious way to describe somebody. He is a very capable bastard. Frank Ryan, the capable bastard. Don't get caught between him and a hard place in the glory hole. An able-bodied seaman and a very capable bastard. He had been around the trade union movement for quite a while and had been port agent in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Ryan was elected ship's chairman for one voyage of the Washington. Later, he became a lieutenant of New York City Transit Union boss Mike Quill. As far as the right was concerned, he was a flaming radical. But when it came down to brass tacks, he was just another Curran man in disguise. He caused a lot of trouble, but he never fooled us. Jesse Gray, who was then about 21 years old, was chairman of the steward's department and, on one or two voyages, had been elected ship chairman. He was a militant organizer and a great strike leader, as I recall. Many years later, Jesse and I reminisced about all the many strikes we had on ship. We had all the workers joining us, and we would tie the ship up in a minute, nail it to the pier. In a minute, nail it to the pier. We had all the workers joining us, and we could tie the ship up in a minute, nail to the pier. Okay. I recall one occasion when the crew went straight to the Union Hall, right up to the National Board to present their grievances. Curran was there and could be expected opposed to the strike. Curran was there and, as could be expected, opposed to the strike. After a lot of militant anti-Curran rhetoric, the board nevertheless went along with him and voted against the strike. I remember Jesse talking to the crew after that. He sure didn't want to go along with the board. But the majority voted to accept their decision, and everybody went back to work. The NMU held a convention on October 1947 at the Manhattan Casino. It was a Curran sweep both locally and nationally, accomplished with the able-bodied support of the local police and Curran's own henchmen and thugs in the Union. He would carry his men from port to port just to vote in and help supervise local elections. A friend of mine tells a story about a seaman meeting a shipmate of his in New Orleans. "I thought you were just in New York the other day. How did you get down here so fast?" he asked. I caught a fast freighter. He was the terse reply. Despite this offensive, the left slate, which was headed by Blackie Myers and Ferdinand Smith, a black man, won 15,000 of the 60,000 votes nationally. Blackie Myers is a crazy name. Once again, so many wild names in this thing. A friend of mine tells a story about a seaman meeting a shipmate of his in New Orleans. This is a bad joke. I thought you were just in New York the other day. How did you get down here so fast, he asked. I caught a fast freighter, was the terse reply. Despite this offensive, the left slate, which was headed by Blackie Myers and Ferdinand Smith, a black man, won 15,000 of the 60,000 votes nationally. I was at the national convention and remembered that there were a couple of dozen police scattered around the hall where the voting took place. Paddy wagons waited expectantly on the outside. A police lieutenant would, from time to time, take the microphone and warn the crowd against creating disturbances, as brawls between the Currenites and the rank and file broke out all over the room. Curran was at his demagogic, red-baiting best, foretelling the dire consequences of a communist takeover of the Union. He warned that the ship owners would never bargain with the Reds. With this election, Union democracy was thrown out the window. The Constitution was rewritten with the bureaucrats now firmly in charge of what had once been the most democratic union in the country. The Coast Guard began backing up the attack on the left by issuing passes. It became mandatory for merchant marines to carry Coast Guard passes, and none were being issued to militants. By the late 40s, communists were effectively barred from shipping out of any ports in the country. So once again, going back to a theme that I'm catching, or a narrative line I'm catching throughout this book, is that, things fall apart. And so much of Harry's life, from what I'm noticing, is just disappointment after radical optimism. It's like these radical ideas, you see a party be formed, you see people get galvanized, you see movements be made, and amazing things done. And then slowly over time, you see them deteriorate. So you get what I'm saying? It's such a sad sort of story. It's almost like a type of tragedy, a grand, lifelong narrative tragedy that's hard to put in words. You see this party that you've dedicated your life to sort of turn your back on you. You see movements that you were willing to risk your life for and that you've killed for, probably, because Harry was in 2 wars. Fought in the Spanish Civil War and also fought in World War I. This man might have caught a body or 2. You feel me? And yet and still that party turns its back on you. You get what I'm saying? It's like, it's so crazy. You join the most radical workers union in the country, and then you see the radical workers union get taken over by bureaucrats and essentially glorious bastards. You get what I'm saying? It's such a sort of sad thing, to notice. Even though this is a political biography, this book here is not the story of his personal feelings per se, because never in there he says, I felt sad, I cried, I was depressed. None of that. This is a political biography meant to talk about his life as a, activist. But still, there's a type of tragedy, a type of melodrama, or it's hard to put into words what you're actually experiencing when you really sit back and analyze everything that he's going through. So, yeah, it's just getting sad. This book has usually books start off like, sad beginning and then glorious sort of, triumphant end. This is like, up from slavery. Everything is in our grasp, like the power of the youth and the power of idealism is right there. And then slowly you see it sort of wither away. It's sort of very captivating. But we're going to continue here. We're going to be reading until page 570, so till chapter 21. So we only have about 5 more pages to go. But let's continue here. The 14th Party Convention. I stopped sailing on the Washington in March 1948 to devote full time to writing the book. This was made possible by Paul Robeson. I had met him through Bill Patterson. The two were close friends, and Bill had helped bring Robeson into the left progressive movement. Many tributes have been written about Paul, and I knew them all to be true. He was a great musician, singer, and actor. But more importantly, I knew him to be a great human being and an ardent fighter for black rights. We had often discussed the book, I was working on, Robinson was sympathetic to what I was doing and anxious to see the book, the first of its kind by a black Marxist in print. When Bill explained it would be possible to finish the manuscript in a few months if I could work full time on it, Paul was more than willing to subsidize me, offering $100 a month. Shout out to Paul Robinson for holding the boy down. Held the boy down. That's so real. That's so real. During the next few months, I worked hard on the manuscript. I was very fortunate to have a good editor who was of invaluable help to me and a very capable political consultant as well. The encouragement of my wife Belle and other friends was also most important and helpful to me. At the same time, I was teaching classes on the Afro-American question at the Jefferson School and party training schools in the district. I found these tasks complemented each other nicely. In the classes, I was able to use material I was working on for the book. The lively discussions provided useful criticisms, and the questions helped to clarify my ideas and formulations. In the fall of 1948, my book, Negro Liberation, was published. It received great acclaim in the communist press, both here and abroad, and was published in a number of languages: Russian, Polish, German, Czech, and Hungarian. It came to be regarded by the party as a basic text in its field. Okay, we got to read that then. Meetings and seminars were set up which discussed the book. Shortly after its publication, I spoke at mass meetings in Detroit, Ann Arbor, and Chicago. The position of the book was not new, but a reaffirmation of the revolutionary position developed at the Sixth Comintern Congress in 1928. The heart of this position is that the problem is fundamentally a question of an oppressed nation with full rights of self-determination. It emphasized the revolutionary essence of the struggle for black equality, arising from the fact that the special oppression of blacks is a main prop of the system of imperialist domination over the entire working class and the masses of exploited American people. Therefore, the struggle for black liberation is a component part of the struggle for proletarian revolution. It is the historic task of the working class movement, as it advances on the road to socialism, to solve the problem of land and freedom of the black masses. What was new in the book was the thorough analysis of the concrete conditions of black people in the post-war period. I made extensive use of population data, the 1940 census, the 1947 plantation count, and other sources, in order to show that the present-day conditions affirmed the essential correctness of the position we had formulated years before. I was very happy when the book was finally finished and in print. I felt that combined with the positive ideological struggle on the question which resulted in the 1946 resolution, the book laid a solid foundation for the party's future work in the field. I felt that as future crises developed and the oppression of the masses intensified, the black movement for equality and freedom would take a nationalist direction towards a struggle for political power and some form of self-government. For this reason, a program based on the principle of self-determination is an essential weapon in welding together the powerful revolutionary alliance of the black masses and the working class movement. Just prior to the publication of Negro Liberation, the party's 14th convention was held in New York City. The convention took place in the midst of a growing reactionary offensive. It was a period of mounting Cold War, Taft-Hartley anti-labor legislation, loyalty oaths, and direct measures to illegalize and destroy the party. At the same time, every effort was made to discredit and wipe out all progressive traces of New Deal legislation. The sharp swing to the right had just recently resulted in the expulsion of the left from the CIO unions, a crushing defeat for the communists. At the same time, top leadership sections of the black reformists were shifting to support for Truman's anti-communist campaign and imperialist designs as embodied in the Truman Doctrine, early 1947, and the Marshall Plan, June 1947. And if clearer indication of the growing attack on the left generally and the communists in particular were needed, the Justice Department provided it with the indictment of almost the entire party leadership. Crazy. The Justice Department put charges on the entire leadership of the Communist Party. In July 1948, the entire National Board was indicted on violations of the Smith Act. I don't know what the Smith Act is. Somebody, put it in the chat. What is the Smith Act? This has to be like being a communist is like straight up illegal. In America, if you even get caught reading the manifesto, that's 5 years in jail and 100 lashes. What was the Smith Act? God damn, that's harsh. How do you indict the leaders of an entire party just for being a part of that party? And the crazy thing is, America never did that to the KKK. America never did that to the American Nazi Party. America doesn't do that to the multiple right-wing reactionary groups that exist in the woods of Appalachia that are training for an impending race war. You know what I mean? Nobody ever does that to them, but the communists get indicted. I'm sorry. So this was the setting for the 14th Party Convention held August 2nd through the 6th, 1948 in New York. With the reactionary offensive intensifying, the party clearly needed to make a sober and accurate assessment of its strengths, of its base of support, and its ability to rally the masses, especially workers and oppressed nationalities, against the ruling class attack. Rather than do this, the party leadership sank further into the illusions of the Grand Coalition. Literally, they're trying to kill you, and these leftists are thinking, how can we make a coalition with them? It reminds me of the Texas Democrats. The people that we hate the most. There are two people that we hate. There's two groups of people that we hate. Generally, all MAGA. All MAGA is bad. And we hate Texas Democrats. If you hate Texas Democrats, put a thumb down in the chat. For real. Oh my God, a grand coalition with people that literally want your head on a pike. Rather than do this, the party leadership sank further into the illusions of the Grand Coalition, which had so dominated their policies since the reconstitution of the party in 1945. There were, of course, a great deal of militant-sounding phrases to cover the retreat. Rhetoric about being the party of socialism, building a fighting communist party, and deepening our theoretical understanding of the role of the party was common in speeches and reports. But underlying all of it was the fundamental righteous orientation that placed a premium on being in the mainstream of the People's Coalition. This was clearly seen in the grandiose assessment of the Wallace campaign. Wallace was not seen as representing the advocates of free enterprise, non-monopoly capital, nor was it understood that his campaign was the tail end of the wartime progressive coalition, the last breath of the dying liberal reformist movement. Rather, the convention's draft resolution portrayed the Wallace Party as a powerful movement on the verge of launching a sweeping attack on the monopolist, reactionary, warmongering policies. The formation of this new party marks the beginning of the end of the two-party system through which big business has so long ruled. It represents a permanent structural force in American politics. How deluded do you have to be? How crazy do you have to be? Like, these people had delusions of grandeur. There has to be a word for thinking that things are all right. You know that meme of the little dog in a burning house, and then one shot is him sitting at his kitchen table drinking a cup of tea, and then the next frame of the comic meme is the dog saying, "I think everything's okay." Like, that's exactly what this is right now. You know what I mean? This is insane. This obviously rightist assessment is furthered by Dennis's characterization of the Progressive Party as having a strong working class base of support. The new Progressive Party is becoming a mass people's party and already embraces the most active and politically conscious sections of the New Labor and People's Coalition. In work among blacks, the party was still in the vice grip of the coalition concept, despite the fact that most of the leadership of the NAACP had swung behind Truman's anti-communist demagoguery and launched a vicious red-baiting campaign. The party pursued a policy of conciliation to the reformists. In practice, this meant the liquidation of any left-led organizations. Speaking at the convention, Ben Davis criticized left errors which were reflected in the failure to give main attention to aiding and supporting the NAACP. This organization is the largest, most authoritative, and most representative among the Negro people. It must be assisted and built. No better example of the party's leadership inability to accurately assess its strength can be seen than Foster's concluding remarks in his discussion on the upcoming struggle to prevent conviction of the party's indicted leadership. There are tremendous powers arrayed against us: the government, the press, the trade union, bureaucratic leadership, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the courts, and all the rest of the machinery of capitalism. But we have one great force on our side, the great masses of American people. Why was the party so divorced from reality, so unable to accurately assess its position and strength in the working class and oppressed masses and make the necessary steps to defend itself? To do this would have required a sharp break from the rightist and tailist policies which had eroded the party's base and influence. It would require a thoroughgoing self-criticism and struggle to break the grips of the rightism which had been carried over from Browder and still remained strong in the new leadership. This the party's leadership was unable to do, for they were themselves the architects of the policy. They had short-circuited the emerging rank-and-file struggle against Browder and led the attack which brought the expulsion of the so-called disgruntled left, guilty of nothing more than attempting to complete the struggle against Browder. And now they were just as fervent in their refusal to reevaluate post-war policies. Foster led the way by declaring that it was utterly false to say that at the 1945 Emergency Convention, the party had not carried through the struggle against Browder. He arrived at a centrist solution, attributing such a view to leftist renegade grouplets. He steadfastly declared that events since then have proved the correctness of the course we then took, and that any weaknesses stem from failures and shortcomings in carrying out a fundamentally correct line. Thus, the 1948 convention set the stage for another inter-party crisis. The upcoming trials would provide the opportunity for expression of a full theoretical rationale, that of peaceful transition to socialism, for these basically liquidationist policies, and leave the party in the depths of a crisis from which it would never recover. So that's the end of chapter 20. We're going to start chapter 21 tomorrow. And once again, this is a long tragedy. Now, Browder's treachery was actually very interesting. And I know I said before when we were reading previous chapters, like Love Stone Unmasked, or, the Sixth Congress of the Comintern, A Blow Against the Right, like, Trotsky's Day in Court, those chapters weren't that interesting to me. Partially because, I was not used to all the jargon and everything that he was speaking about in those chapters. And also, I just didn't find that fascinating, partially because, that's in a foreign country at a foreign time, and it's not as related to, the American context, which I'm more familiar with, right? And it seems to be in America, there's a running pattern that whenever the left has a victory, the victory is never fully complete. For example, after the Civil War, after we defeated the slave-owning class, it wasn't fully complete. We didn't kill all the slave owners. You know what I'm saying? We didn't hang them from the gallows. We let them back into power. The presidential election of 1876 basically agreed to end Reconstruction when black people had power throughout the South, when workers were starting to unionize and organize and that sort of stuff. There was never a complete, total leftist victory in America. That's why I found Browder's treachery so captivating, because in that chapter, Harry Haywood is talking about, listen, the communists were able to expel Browder when he became a full right-wing Republican in their midst. But then, William Z. Foster, William Z. Foster didn't let them go through with getting rid of all of the Browderites. They let the Browderites sort of stay. I guess that's different. I guess that's different than the previous chapters, right? When the Trotskyites when Trotsky was expelled from the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, they got rid of all the Trotskyites. It was a complete, total leftist victory. Nobody was left living. You get what I'm saying? But in the case of the American context, in the American Party, they kicked out Browder and they thought that the snake wouldn't regenerate its head. You get what I'm saying? So there's never been full, total leftist victory in America from our understanding of history. I just find this endlessly fascinating. I found the Browder treachery chapter very fascinating. But without further ado, we're going to wrap this up. And We only have 2 more chapters left. 2 more chapters in this book. So tomorrow we're going to try to read A Party Weekend from Within. That's about 35 pages. And then chapter 22 we'll read the day after, hopefully on Wednesday. Wednesday is a very busy day for me, so we might not do it. We might finish this book by Thursday or Friday or Saturday at the latest, because we have, chapters 21, 22, and the epilogue to read, which is... going to be the conclusion of this text. But I want to give a shout out to everybody who tuned in to this wonderful live stream. Thank you for being patient with me and working with me today. Shout out to Snake and shout out to Arthur Sage for showing love. All right. Snake says, it's short but too long for me to type into the chat. I don't know exactly what you're saying, Sage, but much love to Snake, man. What time about do you try to broadcast? I'm in Budapest, Hungary. Snake, I am in Budapest, Hungary. The time where I'm at right now is about 9 p.m. We began this live stream about an hour and 15 minutes ago. So I usually broadcast in the evening, but my times are irregular. The best thing to do is to subscribe to this channel and get the notification bell on so that you're aware of every time that we go live. But usually I'm reading in the evening in my time, which might be the afternoon or the morning if you're based in the U.S. So shout out to Snake and everybody else who show love in this joint. I appreciate all of y'all. Y'all be easy out there. Power to the people and peace.